so one of the spider lights was already set up. I just need to bring it over. The next one I'm going to set up. And I actually like to have this at the bottom, and it does need to be tight. Level it out. So when I brought the second spider light out, I realized it's not going to attach directly to this light stand. If you can see, we need a connector between the two. And there is one in the drawer, but I had to hunt for it. So here's the connector, and it has two sockets, and then the thing that allows us to change the angle on the top, which seems to be a little stiff here. Huh. Maybe we have a fixed angle there. Yeah, it's not changing. Okay, so we'll put this on here. Needs a little bit more. There we go. Tighten that down. And then get this one out of the way. Insert the next spider light. Still needs some resistance. And this also needs to be tightened up. Let me turn this so you can see it. Tightened up here, because otherwise this rotates. So as usual, we just tighten all the knobs. I'm going to tighten these down. Then I'm going to loosen this one and see if I can get this thing to break loose. And that is not working. So I will tell Maxon about that. Luckily that's a pretty good angle for what we're doing. Now I'm going to grab the soft box. And these are on the top shelf of the closet, and they feel heavy duty. They're designed to handle some heat. Okay, so while the camera was off, I went out and put a second softbox on the second set of lights. I discovered that the bigger softbox didn't have one of the struts in it. So I'm using a smaller one. The technique is the same. You have these flexible wands that you stick into the base of the lights. And now I'm going to raise this up a bit. And maybe move it a little to the front of our subject here. And then I'm going to plug the light in to the wall. And we do have outlets on both sides, so you shouldn't need to have wires going across your set. Now, as it turns out, we have pretty good window light here, especially for subjects that are low. Like if you have a model who's sitting, this window light would be quite good. If you have people standing, especially if they're tall people, the light's going to taper off a bit, and that's a problem. But we're going to close down all the windows and just go with these lights to see what happens then. So the camera has been set to daylight balance. And I won't adjust that until later. So let me make sure this is still running. Now with these lights on, I see some shadows that didn't show up as prominently before. And we will make adjustments, maybe, to help with that. Yeah, I want to get some tape and just pull this forward a little. So now we're working entirely with the Spiderlites, and I'm using the daylight color balance, which isn't spot on, but it's consistent between the lights. So that means I can adjust the whole overall balance to get it where I want later on. And in general, I don't use automatic white balance unless things are really going sideways, because if I use a consistent color balance for the camera, then I can make a simple shift for all the images once I figure out what the correct balance is. Now this is pretty even light, and some of you would probably call it boring light. So if we turn off one of the lights, it might get more interesting. Or we can do a combination of the lights. When we start talking about how we're lighting something, we usually talk in terms of a main light and a fill light, or a key light and a fill light. Surprisingly, the smaller light, the narrower light, is usually called the key light, at least in traditional lighting situations. So this one on my left would be the key light, and then the one on the right would be the fill light, because it's broader. So something like this might be a somewhat traditional lighting pattern. Stronger light from the key light, weaker light from the fill light, and the fill light is wider as well. Now, a lot of this is by looking at your subject and just sort of thinking about it, using your experience with continuous light in available light situations. But we can start to talk about ratios at this point, actually put some numbers to it, which will become more important when we start using flash. So I'm turning on the light meter that is in the studio drawer, or at least that's where it should be, and I'm choosing the mode that is for continuous light. So it's the one without lightning bolts. And I'll probably do a separate video on this later, but just to get you started. And I have this dome set, so it's all the way over. So there's the sensor, it's actually covering the sensor. Then it gives me a reading for a specific ISO. And I'm going to bump it up to 1,000. And it's saying at a 60th of a second, the light arriving to the front of my model here is basically 5.6 and a half, halfway between f5.6 and f8. Now, I could transfer that into my camera settings and get a pretty good reading. That's like shooting with a camera meter and having a gray card here. This reading is not influenced by whether my subject is light or dark. What I want to talk about right now is the ratio of the lights. So if I point the light meter this way, and it measures the light coming in this way, I get f4 and a half. And then if I do the same thing this way, I get f5.6 and 7/10. This thing reads in tenths. So that's about one stop, a little bit more. And so what we could say is that this is one stop brighter than this is, or in other words, the lighting ratio is 2 to 1, twice as much light there as here. Typically people talk about lighting ratios in terms of the quantity of the light, not the F number for the light. So you have to do that conversion that one stop is twice as much, 2 stops is 4 times as much. And a typical portrait in a traditional setting that's not super flat is usually going to be in the 1 to 2 to 1 to 4 range. If you're shooting black and white and you're careful about how you're handling things, you can shoot with a much wider range. If you're shooting something in the style of a TV news broadcast, then your ratios are going to be much closer than that. They're going to be 1 to 2 or 1 to 1.5. And we can change these ratios both by checking the power settings on these lights or by moving them in and out. And I encourage you to play with both of them. And once again, some of this is knowing the numbers and knowing sort of what's a reasonable number for the situation, but a lot of it is just looking at the light. And of course, if you're shooting digital, you can take a test shot and then see how that turns out.